Here we are again, folks, looking at Edge Magazine issue number 7, showing off my collection to the right. And we're going to look at the reviews of April 1994. And it starts with Doom, the Evil Unleashed. And it gets a 4-page review. I don't know any other Edge games. I don't know any other Edge reviews that were 4 pages long. Guess what? It ends with a 7 out of 10. Can you believe that? Yeah. The review says it's too simplistic. This review is notoriously infamous for asking the question, if only you could talk to these creatures, then perhaps you could try and make friends with them, form alliances. Now that would be interesting. And they say on top of that, after a week or two, after the graphics had worn off, you'll be longing for something new in this game. Wow, I don't know how this slipped by the editing. So yeah, this Doom still is to this day almost everything a shooting game should try to be. Did they discuss the multiplayer in this review? I don't remember. But yeah, Doom, good game. Should have gotten a 9 or a 10. I would have given it a 10 even, because this was a. If you count multiplayer and level editing, it's definitely a 10. I have to admit, as a adventure game alone, it's not the most fantastic game of all time, but you could do so much with the engine. This game had its own culture. Ridge Racer for the arcade gets an 8. I think they should have gotten a 9. Nothing looked this fantastic at the time, and it played also very well. This was everything an arcade game could have asked to be in 1994. And it would help sell the PlayStation 1. Super Darius II gets a 6 out of 10 for the PC Engine Super CD. I'm not familiar with the Darius series of shooting games, and a 6 doesn't make me interested in getting into them. Prepare to meet thy doom. Everybody was talking about Doom, and rightfully so. Super Puyo Pop, one of the best 5 or so action puzzle games you can play competitively. I myself prefer Dr. Mario, but I think this one's better than Tetris Attack, which is also known as Puzzle League. Yeah, first released for the I believe for the Neo Geo and the PC Engine. Now finally released for the Super Nintendo. There's also a Genesis version called Dr. Robotnik's Mean Bean Machine. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, this game was actually released in the West as Kirby's Avalanche. Speaking of classics, we have Mega Man X, which only gets a 7. Can you believe that? They say it's simple and old school. Well, so what? I mean, this is Mega Man X. Fantastic level design, great controls, fantastic music, interesting bosses. Still the best Mega Man X game, and the only X game that could come close to the quality of Mega Man 2 and Mega Man 3. And they only give it a 7. So what's wrong with Edge this month? And here they have Scavenger 4, also known as, I forgot the name, but it was also released for the Sega CD, and that version is better known in the West. It's a pretty looking Unreal shooter, which time has forgotten because these were a dime a dozen at the time. And this game, yeah, it didn't have very interesting gameplay, so it got kind of bad scores, but Edge thinks it's just as good as Doom. Of course it's not. They gave it a 7. Lunar, the Silver Star. I'm not very familiar with the Lunar series of games, but yeah, as far as I know, they're generic role-playing games for the Sega CD, with full motion video put in to emphasize the story of sorts. And it gets a 6, which is above average. But still not worth getting a Sega CD for. Were that all the reviews for this month? Nope. We have SimCity 2000. I myself prefer the Super Nintendo version of SimCity 1 because I don't care much for hills and connecting water. All the fun things I like to build in SimCity 2000, they were also in the Super Nintendo version, you know, like the casino and the fountain. Even though they're really simple, I guess I like the elegance. But my second favorite version of SimCity is 2000, which has a lot going for it. It was much more complicated than the original. Maybe that's the reason why I prefer playing SimCity Super Nintendo. I've kind of figured it out. It's fun to me just to build that perfect city. Whereas SimCity 2000, never got that far. Looked great. That was the biggest deal at the time. It looked fantastic. You really had all kinds of different buildings. So it really felt like you were building your own city. You had neighboring cities, which was fun. So, yeah. For most people, the best version of SimCity. And Edge only gives it an 8. Should have gotten a 9. Now we have Escape from Monster Manor, which looks like a first-person shooting game. But it only gets a 5 out of 10. Yeah, it's kind of, they say it's like Wolfenstein, but then for the 3DO. Well, I guess it's not that good. So, another lackluster title released on the 3DO. And here we have Muscle Bomber, a Japanese wrestling game made by Capcom. So this is probably the one with Mike Haggar. Yeah, it is, because I see him here on the left. What are they called again? Saturday Night Live Wrestling or something in the States. So it was released on the arcade, and the FM Towns Marty was, as far as I'm aware, a good conversion of the arcade game. But it only gets a 5. I think it should have got higher because it's one of the better wrestling games. If you're in that kind of thing, they compare it to Street Fighter and they say it doesn't have the depth of Street Fighter. Well, they're right, but wrestling games have their own charm. They have an arcade view of a older game, R-Type 2, released in 1989, and I think that at the time one of the editors had a big love for R-Type, because later on there will be an issue with older R-Type on the cover, and even later editions of the magazine they still talk about R-Type being so great. And yeah, I think it's good, and it was I believe R-Type 1 at the time was ahead of its time with all the ship options. But I don't think R-Type 2 is any better than Lightning Force or I forget the names now. So yeah, like Space Mega Force, what do you call it? Anyhow, plenty of good 2D shooters. And if I were to advise you to pick up one nowadays, I would say check out Radiant Silvergun or Ikaruga. R-Type 2, yeah, it's good for its time, but not special. For fans who are into Night Trap for the Sega CD, it's at 5th place now, so it keeps slipping. Sorry for that. Edge never reviewed Sonic CD, so Edge Magazine didn't review all the games. They only reviewed the games which they thought people would be interested in their own subscription demographic, which were people who were a bit older and not interested in Sonic games anymore, apparently. And you can tell if you look at Most Wanted, what kind of games do we have here? We have Galaxian 4, I don't know this game, but we have Daytona, we have FIFA for the 3DO, and Ridge Racer for the PlayStation. These are very technologically driven games. So you don't see Super Metroid here. You don't see Sonic 3. I don't know if that was released yet. So the usual games were the readers of Edge. They were more interested in technology, and if you were interested in the games, you would get the other magazines, which are shown here, like Games Master, which was more of a, which still exists, which reviews more or less every game released. And you had Mega for the Mega Drive and PC for the PC format for the PC. You also had PC Gamer. So overlap. You have Total, you have Game Zone, and Super Play, all discussing games for the Super Nintendo. So why would Edge spend time on all those child's games? Later on, Donkey Kong Country wouldn't even be reviewed by Edge, which I find fascinating. Okay, so reaching the end, and we have an interview with Jez San, who we know for making the FX chip for the Super Nintendo. That's his claim to fame. He continued to work on Vortex and other things, but yeah, Argonaut is mostly known for helping Nintendo with their games. And it's interesting to read how I love this part. He discusses how he follows all the new trends on CompuServe, CIX, and BIX. These are like bulletin boards on the internet, which was, didn't have the World Wide Web yet. So, fascinating how back then people also used the internet to get all their information. Oh, he also talks about virtual reality, and I love what he says because it turned out to be the truth. He says, people only liked it for 1 or 2 times, and it was very expensive, and it was better for amusement parks than something at home. And he's totally right. And the Q&A this month, again, not that many interesting new questions. The same old things about how quick a computer is. Pretty technical stuff, though, so if you're into that, it could be interesting. And then we finish with a preview for next month. We're going to be discussing Namco, which would get a renaissance in the mid-90s. The makers of Pac-Man and Rally X, they kind of lost my interest in the late 80s and early 90s. But with Tekken and Ridge Racer, they were totally back. And then they had the Soul Calibur games. So we'll read about Namco next month, and there's a 16-page supplement, which I don't have, about the future consoles. And here we have GE, which spells out Edge, and the black cover. So that's Edge issue number 7, April 1994. And I'll see you next time to discuss May issue number 8. See you around.